Hi, my dear friends from all over the world. So, this is a series of interviews with some people who are really good at something. I believe that you can only take advice from someone who lives the life that you want, as you can learn so much. So, let's learn together. Our guest today is Linh, and Linh is doing her PhD in love at Cambridge. Have you ever heard about someone who studies love as a PhD? I haven't, so I decided to interview Linh. Linh is also a children's author, so we talked a lot about her research, and I think this interview can also shed light on the topic how you can find this right balance between work and study at the University of Cambridge. So enjoy.
I ended like an 8-year-long relationship. I was unemployed. I sold my book, my first book, and got into Cambridge in the same month within the span of a couple weeks.
Today I'm interviewing Linh. Linh is a PhD student who is doing her PhD in love. Linh,
Hi.
hello. Tell us a random fact about yourself. I ask everyone to tell it.
Oh, I pole dance.
You pole dance?
Yeah.
Nice. So, has it influenced your choice as a PhD or not?
Actually, yeah, it has. I mean, I wrote my master's dissertation about forms of knowledge that are ignored and have been delegitimized by Western systems of imperialism. And some of those things are ways of knowing that come from being in relationships with people, that come from embodiment, and that come from our feelings. So pole dancing was actually a really big factor in that, because you learn so much about yourself and about the world and about things from movement, and anyone who does any kind of sport would be so deeply aware that so much of embodiment is about knowledge making as well. So that actually was an entryway for me to start thinking about all these ways of knowing that are ignored in our daily lives.
When did you start and how long have you been into it?
So I started my master's in 2021, and I came in wanting to do work on forms of education that are outside classrooms, so outside mainstream Western classrooms. And I ended up taking a completely I mean, it's not a different direction, but it's different than what I expected, because I ended up working with a bit more of a philosophical lens. So I do epistemology, which is ways we create knowledge and what counts as knowledge and knowledge creation.
So what was your master thesis about? What was the title?
The title was on spillage. I don't remember the exact title, but the interesting thing about it was that I handed it in a tote bag. So I had a bag designed, and it was based on Ursula K. Le Guin's carrier bag theory of fiction, which is about how all stories should be in the shape of a bag, because we want to be holding the things that come up. So I filled it with a bunch of objects that are considered unimportant, like pads, tampons, earphones, medication, tissues, masks, hand sanitizer, just everyday things that we use, but it's kind of considered just junk. And then I handed that in my PhD thesis. It was printed out, and I scribbled all over the PhD thesis as well. So it wasn't like a neat little finished product by any means. But I handed it in with the bag with all this stuff to question what gets marked, what gets evaluated, what counts as important in our daily lives, and then in our education system. So that was the form that it ended up taking. Spillage is about all the things that spill out of what is considered the norm. So that could be crying, heartbreak. Those were some of the sites that I looked at in terms of what we're supposed to keep in, repress, and not talk about.
And tell us a bit about your research in PhD. So what were your data procedures? So data gathering and data analysis procedures.
So for my PhD, I'm doing it's very creative. So it's arts based, it's a bit memoir based, and part of the data process behind that is along a post-qualitative inquiry kind of lens, which means that post-qualitative inquiry, which is something Elizabeth St. Pierre writes about a lot, is the idea that data cannot be separated from humans, so it can't be collected and extracted, and the process of extraction makes the important things lose their meaning. So I would say that my data collection process is through a methodology of living and loving. So I live and I write about those experiences in a situated writing auto theory kind of lens.
What were the challenges that you had during your PhD?
So I'm only in my first year right now. I just passed my registration viva, which makes you an official PhD candidate.
Congratulations.
Thank you. I think being able to articulate some of the non-traditional forms of knowledge and research that I'm working with is always a bit of a challenge, especially in more formal spaces. But it's also one that I feel quite supported in, because my supervisor, my examiners, my research group and friends have been really key to making me feel like I can push those boundaries with them, because that's what they're doing as well. So, you know, I just presented at several conferences where I was leading writing workshops, and people were like lying in beanbag chairs, and then I read a zombie story out loud as part of my presentation. So like it's really non-traditional, but and that definitely offers some challenges of being like, oh, how do I situate my work, and like how are people going to understand it, and where does it fit in? But I think the exciting thing is that it's really about pushing the boundaries rather than trying to make it fit in. So that's been a really cool part of it.
Could you tell us a bit about your choosing your supervisor? Because before coming to Cambridge, before applying for a PhD, students are encouraged to contact the supervisors, right?
Yes.
So your research has to match the supervisor's interests, right?
Yes.
What were the interests of your supervisor? Was it like the interest in love, or how was it? Tell us a bit more.
So her research is in new materialism, and that is one of the theories that I work with a lot. But I would say that for me, because I did my master's here, she supervised my master's thesis. So
so you came back to your supervisor.
I came back. Yes, I came back. Yeah. We had a good working relationship, and it felt like I was able to speak to her about very personal things. And like, for me, it's very important to have a lot of freedom in what I do. So for example, in January, I came up with the idea for a zombie story, and that was part of the process of coming up with some of the methods that I was working with. That story ended up being a huge part of my registration report. But it's like super random. And it's very important to me to be able to come up to my supervisor and be like, hi, I just wrote like 1,000 words of a zombie story. Like, can we look at it together and like tease out what's in there? And she's like, yeah, absolutely. And so open to that. And then we sit down and she's like, okay, well, now we get to talk about bodies and how they change, and our interactions with the environment, and monstrosity, and what counts as monster, and all of those things that are coming up around this story that I really needed to have a critical conversation with someone about who's going to take that seriously. And I knew from my master's that she was someone who would be open to that. I think an important part of choosing your supervisor, because I went through the application process with a bunch of different supervisors as well, and many of them in other schools like UCL or Edinburgh, UAL were also wonderful. And I think an important thing is that you have to be very honest about what you want to be working on. Like, I do very experimental stuff, so I feel like I had to be super open about that and be like, this is what I want to do, and I'm not really compromising on that, and is that something that you'd be able to support me in? Because otherwise, like, we just end up being miserable for 3-4 years, which is a long time to not get along with someone. And it's really one of the most important relationships you have in your career. So yeah.
And maybe could you please elaborate on the application process for a PhD? How did it differ for you? So you had the person differ for you in comparison to your master's application, for example. So you needed to write the personal statement, the you needed to provide the university with the references. Yes. Could you expand this?
Yes, so you have to come in with a pretty strong proposal, and that gets judged a lot. So a huge part of the PhD is what you're working on. Obviously, we all know that it's going to change, and there's a lot of flexibility for that. I didn't exactly propose that I would be working on love specifically. I think I said I would be working on a continuation of my master's, which is forms of knowledge like embodiment and relationality and feelings, which is kind of what I'm doing, but I'm narrowing it in on love specifically. But the process in itself, finding a supervisor, talking to supervisors is super important. And then you have your proposal, which needs to be pretty thought out. And then depending on the schools, depending on your own funding situation, then you have to look for funding, which is also a very, very stressful part.
Because in the UK, the PhDs are not funded.
UK PhDs are not funded, which is one of the only schools that do that. I mean, sorry, one of the only countries that do that, which is extremely frustrating. But you often have to look for other sources of funding, so it can get very stressful. I mean, I know for me, my PhD application process was quite a period of stress in my life. I looked at many schools. I ended up only applying to 4, all of which I got into, but then I didn't get funding for everything. So it becomes a pretty big consideration.
And did you apply straight away, or did you have the gap year between your master's and PhD?
I had a gap year, which honestly I would recommend. I took 4 years between my undergrad and my master's, and then 1 year between my master's and my PhD. I am a writer by trade. Like I write children's books. I'm a children's author. So I had a book come out in between, so it made sense for me to take the year out, but I would also recommend doing that in general, just to have a bit more time to sit with your project and develop it, especially at Cambridge, because you start in October and then PhD applications are due at the end of November. So you have very little time to put together a proposal for what you want to work on. And unless you already have another master's or have a lot of certainty in what you want to do, like it's going to change by the end of the year. And and it also increases your chances of getting funding.
So you mentioned that you write books for children.
Yes.
And did your PhD somehow affected your style of writing?
Yes, but also I think my children's books are a bit separate. Well, I wouldn't say it's separate because it's still all me writing, but I write my PhD in a very memoir-y voice. So it's first person, it's very personal, it's very creative and situated. But I only write children's fiction. So it's interesting because I don't think I can write fiction for adults. Like I don't think I have a voice that can write adult fiction. I don't know why. And conversely, I don't think I can write nonfiction for children. So for me, if I'm writing children's work, I'm writing fantasy. And if I'm writing adult stuff, it's memoir, it's very personal, it's like personal essays and such like that. So to some extent it's a bit separate, but I think it still very much influences each other in ways that I can't necessarily identify because it's all me writing. So yeah. And
have you written anything this year, or did you kind of take a break from your author path?
No, I am still going. So I finished up a manuscript over the Christmas break. My agent took a look at it, got back to me with edits that I have not looked at, but will soon. So I am kind of juggling both at the same time, and going through phases. You know, I had to focus on my registration report and passing my registration viva for the past few months, so that took up a lot of my time.
And it sounds like you're doing a lot of writing, because you need to write
a lot of writing.
Yes. Like, how do you balance? Because like a PhD writing, then your story writing, and
Yes, I mean, it is a lot of writing. I
Mm-hmm.
do love to write, so that
Mm-hmm.
is a fortunate thing. But I do have to keep it a little separate. So
Mm-hmm.
it's not like I can switch back and forth in a week or within a couple weeks even. I go through month-long periods where
Mm-hmm.
I'm just focusing on the PhD, and then I stop that, and then I go through a longer period where I'm just
Mm-hmm.
finishing my manuscripts or doing edits or writing, and I have to really power write and focus within that time on each thing.
So they never go simultaneously. You
Not
always
really.
focus on one.
Yeah.
And do you do personal writing, such as journaling, for instance?
Yeah, I journal consistently, and that's kind of throughout, but
Mm-hmm.
that's just for me and my own processing.
Do you do it as a regular habit or when you feel like doing it?
I do it when I feel like doing it, but it
Mhm.
ends up being pretty regular.
Okay.
Yeah.
This is very interesting. So you end up writing a lot
Yes,
for all
I write a
three of
lot.
yes.
Yeah. Yes.
And so you did your master's here at this beautiful Newnham College,
Yes, it's very lovely.
and then you decided to stay here and do your PhD here, right?
Yes.
What affected your choice of college?
That is a very important question. I mean, the first thing I looked at was funding,
Mm-hmm.
and Newnham has a lot of opportunities for
Mhm.
funding, which are really good. I am not funded by the college in terms of my actual PhD.
Mm-hmm.
However, one thing that was really important to me is that Newnham has a lot of good funding for other things. So, for
Mhm.
example, they have really good sports grants,
Mhm.
and I do a lot of pole dancing, so that ends up taking up several £100s, and they would reimburse me for all of those expenses, which is really, really good.
Yes.
It makes a really big difference when you're just trying to
Mhm.
get by on the student budget. And then the other thing is Newnham is very good with like research and travel grants for
Mhm.
conferences and such. So, for example, this year they paid for me to go to Oxford for a conference, as well as to France, where I did a week-long conference, and it was fully funded by Newnham as well, which is really good, and not every college has that.
Yes.
So, and then they also have book grants, and I feel like there's a lot of support for that, those little things throughout the year, which really adds up.
Mm-hmm.
The other thing is the college is really beautiful. It's very distinct in its architecture. It doesn't look like any other college.
Yes.
So I really love the gardens. You know, I live on site, so I'm very close, and I get to walk by the gardens almost every day, which feels like such a blessing to be in such a beautiful space. And then the other thing as well is that it's very queer friendly, and there's a huge queer community here, and that's been really important. That's been a big part of my community at Newnham, and feeling safe and respected. And it's really nice being able to see the flags and the posters up that are about like lesbians are everywhere, and like it has a very a strong history of feminist literature, and I think that's also reflected in the facilities, like the library as well is very lovely and very well stocked, because for a long time it's a women's only college, so the women of the college could not access the university library. So the Newnham library is very well stocked, because it had to be the only library for a lot of its women and non-binary members for a while. So, yeah.
And how was your social life during your both master's and PhD? Did you mostly socialize within college, or did you maybe go to many different other colleges? What kind of events did you prefer to attend?
Formals are always fun. I mean, I have an unofficial formal challenge thing going. I mean, which, as I'm sure you talk about in other videos, I think I've been to, I mean, in 2 years, not that many, like 18-ish at this point, but I'm hoping to go to all of them in 4 years. And I would say my social life has been really good, because Cambridge is just a city where you can attend a lot of events and go to a lot of places. I like to say that it's very emergent, because things just come up, and then we're so close because we live so close together. So it's like, yeah, I'll show up in an hour. And I really love that about the city. So a lot of my social life has been within my cohort in education. So I hang out a lot with the children's literature stream because I'm a children's author, and with the arts creativity stream, which was my own research group. So a lot of my friends are from the faculty, and I have college friends as well. So there's kind of like a few separate groups that are really wonderful. And I think a lot of the events I end up going to are just things that come up, and people are like, do you want to go to this talk, or do you want to get ice cream here? Or I've never really felt lonely, which I know is an experience that might be rare, because a lot of people have described PhDs to me as it's a very lonely process. But I personally have not felt really lonely, so I think that's been really fortunate.
What do you think helped you to not feel lonely during your PhD?
I really like spending a lot of time at the faculty, and also just, you know, being proactive in meeting people and going to events and being like, do you want to go grab a coffee, or do you want to walk home together? And those little things just end up being like turning into more deep friendships. And then I feel like I always have someone around, which is really nice.
And how do you enjoy your faculty? So your department, do you attend a lot of events that they provide?
Yeah, I do attend. I was quite involved. I mean, I co-chaired the Faculty of Education's graduate conference this year, Kaleidoscope. So like that made me quite involved in the faculty in co-curricular ways as well. I really enjoyed a lot of like just the events that the student council would put on, which are just very fun to get around and meet people and talk to people. The faculty library is very beautiful, and I think it has a very friendly atmosphere. So I feel like with Newnham, the college, as well as my faculty, the atmosphere is very welcoming, and that was very important to me in choosing a college as well, because I'm also an international student, and when I first came here for my master's, I didn't know a single person. So it was very important to me to find a college and a community that was very welcoming, and I think I did really find that. So yeah.
What's your favorite memory of Cambridge?
I think my favorite memories are of the random punts that I've done. And it's because so if you're in a river college, like one of the college that has a site on the river, you get access to free punts. And there have been twice now where I'm like with a friend, and then somehow I end up on a punt, and I'm like not really sure how I got there. So the last time this happened was my friend was visiting from Toronto, and I was with my partner as well, and we were like, let's go see St. John's. It's a beautiful college. So we go in. St. John's is a river college. We're like at the riverbank and looking at all the punts going in, and then someone from the river is like, hey, Lynn, and it's one of my friends from the faculty, and she's like on a punt in the river, and she's like, do you guys want to hop on? So we like crawl from the riverbank onto the punt, and then suddenly we're like in the middle of the river and like like I don't know how this happened, but that's the second time that's happened. Before, the last time was at Queen's College. So I love that these random moments just keep happening, and I feel like it really it really exemplifies how, because we're all here together in this beautiful space, there's so much possibility for things to just come up, and then you say yes to them, and then suddenly you're on a punt in the camp. So, yeah.
Yes, Cambridge is very spontaneous.
It's so spontaneous. It's such a spontaneous city. I really love that about it.
And do you remember where you were and what you were doing when you received your first and second offer from Cambridge? So for master's program and for a PhD program.
For my master's, I was in Montreal, and I don't remember exactly what I was doing, but it came at a pretty critical time in my life, because I had just gone through like a big life change. I ended like an 8-year-long relationship. I was unemployed. It was the middle of the pandemic. Unemployed because I just like quit my full-time job, and I was like, I am gonna do something else with my life. Move to a new city. So I was like unemployed in Montreal, and then I sold my book, my first book, and got into Cambridge in the same month, within the span of a couple weeks, very shortly after all those things happened. So it was a bit of a pretty big turning point. And then for my my PhD, I was I don't remember where I was when I got the acceptance to get in, but when I got my funding offer, I was in Portugal. I was in an Airbnb by myself, writing another manuscript, and also going through a breakup. So, so pretty pivotal times emotionally, where Cambridge has always felt like a place to come back to and reset. So. Yeah.
And it was, you know, you always had writing in the background, so
Yeah.
you just stayed true to yourself and you did what you love.
Yeah.
So, do you think this is the thing that helped you to get to Cambridge?
Absolutely. I think that being bold about some of those choices was really pivotal. I remember being so scared of letting go of so many big things. It was 2020, so it was the pandemic year, and I, you know, the relationship, and then I quit my job, and I remember being so scared to let go of those pillars that seemed like safety, you know, and my colleague telling me that the universe catches you when you make space for it too. And I think another way of thinking about that that's maybe more grounded is just that you can't make change in any capacity without space for it. And clearing out those other things just opened up something that I didn't know that I even wanted to go to Cambridge. I didn't know that that was a possibility. I didn't know that I could publish a book at that point. You know, that was before any of that happened. And so when I let go of it, there was really nothing on the other side. I remember waking up and my schedule being completely open on this beginning of October 2020 and having absolutely nothing in there. And it felt terrifying. But then that was the week I was like, I'm going to look into this program. And I remember my friend did this program a few years ago, and maybe I should reach out and like ask her what that was all about. And there's so much that comes up when you make the space for it, and you don't even know that yet before it happens. So I think that really much it very much informs my research in terms of how I move through my methodology and through life, of being like, if you make space for things and then follow what you love, that's how meaning is created.
And how do you make space for these things?
That is a very big question. I think that a big part of that is making space in the day-to-day to reflect, to journal and sit with what feels right and what doesn't feel right. A big part of this work is knowing that I can't provide the answers for everybody. I can provide examples of it, and I could provide things to think about and how it has looked in my own life. But when we talk about love and body and relationships, those are things that are going to look very differently to every single person. So it's about the other person, everybody doing that work in their own lives and sitting with what feels good to me right now and what doesn't feel good, and what do I have to change, and making the space day to day for like those small reflections and that rest time. And this is something that a lot of activists talk about, like Trisha Hersey's The Nap Ministry talks about how rest is very sacred, and it is a site of resistance, because not just that it enables us to go back to something that's more productive, but to go back to a world that's more productive, but to sit with ourselves and recognize that that rest is sacred for itself, and in of itself. So I think that that is pretty crucial in creating space. but those are practices that are going to look a little differently for everybody, and that's something that I'm still working on. I'm only in the first year, so I hope to be able to provide other strategies for that as well.
And what are your regular habits then? Do you make space for your rest during the day?
I sleep a lot. I feel like that's honestly the core of everything that I have been able to do. I sleep like 10 hours a day. I sleep an absurd amount, and sometimes more, you know. I think that that is pretty key to being able to show up in the world fully as myself. I think prioritizing just taking good care of your body is so important. That also looks very different to everybody. And then time to practice being with your thoughts and recognizing what feels good in your body and what doesn't. And that's a practice. That's something you get better at the more you do. Adrienne Marie Brown talks a lot about that in pleasure activism as well, where we need to learn, she says we need to learn to connect more with the things that we have been born with but have been repressed throughout most of our lives. You know, a lot of people talk about how they make big life changes after a holiday or after a break of some kind, and that's because we're finally giving ourselves the space to sit back and recognize that those big changes need to be made.
Yes.
Yeah.
And yeah, you know, I just want to point out that you're a children's author, right? And there was just a child who popped in our video.
Yeah.
It never happened before. I think everything is light, you know? You stay in this on this frequency and you attract this.
Yeah. And yeah, I mean, I think in terms of like the frequency thing and like the universe catching you, I feel like some of that might sound super like that's just like superstition, but I think a lot of what I want to convey is that love is active and faith is active, because it's not about sitting there and waiting for it to happen. It's about you make choices in your life that are going to lead you to those things, and recognizing that following those ways is a way to create. You're creating action, you're creating knowledge, you're creating relationships with people. All of those things are active things. So it's not about sitting and waiting and being passive at all. Like, love is a very, very active force. It's actually such a powerful driving force. So yes.
Would you like to publish your book after a PhD? Because most of the PhD students, they write their dissertation with the goal of publishing it right after as a book. Is it one of your endeavors?
Yes, I want to publish it as a general audience book, like as a memoir. So I'm not hoping to publish my PhD with an academic press. I think it's not the right fit for it. Part of my work is challenging what gets to count as academic. And I think my work is deeply academic because it's very critical. It's a sustained, long process of thought. It's conversations with people that are very intellectual in their nature, regardless of whatever qualifications those people have. And I want it to be read by a wider audience. You know, academic press is one, they don't pay very well, and two, the audience is going to be more limited in its nature. So I want my work to be more accessible to a wider range.
And what recommendations can you give to the prospect students?
I would say be bold in applying and choosing to apply, and in making the most of your time here, because from an educational perspective, the extracurricular stuff at Cambridge is the essential stuff. Like, that is part of your experience. That is why you're here. So focusing on your academics is just one piece of that, but doing all of these things and enjoying the environment that you're in and going to events and saying yes and ending up on a punt, like that is part of the learning. Like, that is part of the Cambridge experience, and like that is part of how you're going to grow and develop as a person throughout your time here. So I think it's very important to say yes to all of those opportunities and not just get caught up in the schoolwork. well. So
Maybe could you describe the key points that you, maybe, you know, the key concepts that you came up with about love during your writing during this year? What was something that, what was like the eureka moment for you, like aha moment? Did you have any of this?
Well, the initial eureka moment that started my PhD in this topic is that I think we talk about love as if it's so irrational and it's something that's opposite from reason. But you know, I fell in love in a very big way at the start of this year. It kind of coincided with me starting my PhD, and falling in love made me realize that love actually makes things make sense. And there was so much clarity around this experience that I was kind of shocked, because I was like, isn't it supposed to be like irrational and isn't supposed to be confusing? But then the eureka moment was also that learning is supposed to destabilize you. It's supposed to be confusing. If you are just parroting things that you already know that feel safe, then that's not really knowledge creation. That's just you memorizing things. So if you're challenging yourself in a way that is making new knowledge, that is learning and growing, then part of that is going to feel destabilizing. Like that's what people talk about when they talk about academia, is that it's going to be confusing and it's going to be uncertain. And love does that. For sure, it makes you rechange your priorities and rethink things in your life, but it can also be super clarifying to follow that through. So that was a big eureka moment. And then part of the big part of my research, I would say, and how that transforms my research, is that my thesis is on how love makes new paths for knowledge, and love makes new paths in our life. So it can actually restructure a lot of our day-to-day. And so much of what we think is real is actually made up, in the sense that time, for example, the clock time is a construction, time zones are a construction that are quite recent. Like these are clock time, wage labor, like these are like industrial 19th century kind of impositions. And yet we treat it as if it is our reality. So part of it is like a deconstructing of what is reality, which is like a very big thing. And saying that love is part of the reality. Love is the foundational part of the reality. And sitting with love can be a way to retether ourselves in a way that's not bound to these systems.
So talking about time and its connection with love, right? So do you look at time through the prism of quantum physics, or through how would you define it then?
I would say I look at time through felt living time. I'm not even like the most experienced time scholar on this, but there's just so many ways that you can conceptualize time differently, and love is one of those ways. So I'm saying that the way that we have structured our world, time being one example, is just one way to do it. And that love can be another way to do it. You can structure your day around doing what you love and having meals with people you love. And that can be a way to measure time instead of clock time. That is just one example of that. And I'm not saying that we ditch everything. I feel like sometimes when I talk about this, people are like, oh, so it's just chaos. But no, the dichotomy is not just rigid structure or chaos. There are structures that can be fluid as well. I think dance helps me a lot with this, because dance is it's very structured, in the sense that the body, I pole dance, is a firm structure, and yet so much of dance is fluid and flexible. And I think the structures that we create should also be that way.
So can it also be said that then you define time by the moments where you felt the most loved, or when you did something that you really loved?
Yes,
is it the key
for
point?
sure. That's a big one. I think another thing I talk about is how do you make something sacred, and how do you honor sacredness in your life? And time and intentionality are huge parts of that as well.
And I think it takes a lot of self-awareness, because you need to understand what you love.
Yes, yeah, it takes so much self-awareness, which is such an individual practice and process that takes a long time to figure out.
Do you investigate this as well?
Yeah. Yeah.
What instrument do you use? Again, is it talking to people, going through the documentation?
I mean, I think the core part of it is living and loving. And then talking to people is a very big one. And I run workshops that use some of these concepts in a more structured way. And then the other part of it is I rely on a lot of Black feminist theory, queer theory, and indigenous frameworks that are different conceptions of how the world works.
And what is the thing that you would like to kind of teach another person, or maybe just pass the knowledge that you wrote about about love, about your whole PhD? What one thing, or maybe two or three, that you would like to say to another person so that he or she expands his horizons in this field?
I think what I would say is that everyone has and should honor those aspects of our lives that have been ignored or we feel like we need to repress, and that's the spillage piece. So I think when you go through heartbreak, for example, there's a lot of pressure to move on quickly, or you can't talk about it so much, or that there's this empowerment lens as well where you have to like girl boss your way through it. But heartbreak is such a critical period where you learn so much about yourself, and you learn so much about the world and how you want to be in it and your relationships with other people. So it's actually very critical to sit with that and to be like, how am I feeling these emotions? How am I letting them run through me and change me? And then what am I taking away from it? Like, that is a huge learning process. So I would say sit with your heartbreak, sit with your grief, sit with your love. I think that love and grief are so deeply unproductive in our society. That's what we're told, is that it prevents us from going back to work. But they're actually such key moments of defining who we are as a person. So I think the important thing is to sit with that and make space for it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you very much for this lovely interview and for your time and for educating us about this topic.
Thank you.
It was a very interesting conversation.
Thank you.
And all the best in your future endeavors.
Thank you.